I do not know why I was not able to go live. Um, would have preferred it, but couldn't. I didn't see the option pull up like it normally does. But happy Juneteenth. This is a historic day. Um, Yesterday I got some like 3 newspapers just to keep like USA Today, Above the Fold. Wall Street Journal did a good job. So that's going to be really good for my grandnephews or nieces or whatever. Houston Chronicle did not do it above the fold. They did it below the fold. I don't know if that was a money decision. It's kind of odd. The Juneteenth, which originated in Texas. Anyway, but it's not necessarily Houston, but still close enough that it wouldn't be above the fold. I have been so, like, my feelings about it has been so complicated. I got this shirt last year, super proud of it. Always celebrated July 4th. Didn't know about Juneteenth until I was like in high school, and I asked my parents, like, did y'all know about it? And I was like, why didn't we celebrate it? And my mom's from Florida, my dad's from Alabama, so I think they kind of saw it as like kind of a local thing, but they were at least aware. I didn't learn more about it until I went to Galveston one day, because I used to like do a lot of photography and amateur. It was kind of like a hobby. It relaxed me, so I like to capture mostly scenery. So one day I went to Galveston and just explored the city, the historic parts, the blight, the nice, and I saw like a placard, and that's how I learned more fully about African Americans in Galveston in Texas, particularly finding out 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation that they'd been freed. And so I felt very mixed about it, because I was like, I didn't feel like, it just felt like insult to injury. At one point, African Americans, or Americans of African descent, I like to actually say, were enslaved, and it was legal. And then after it wasn't legal, through basically hook and crook, you basically stole 2 more years of people's lives and property. Some people died in slavery, but actually were free. And just the thought of that actually was basically gross to me. I almost felt personally duped. It was very strange. But technically, the Civil War didn't actually end until 1865. So years later, more history lesson, I learned that one of the reasons that Lincoln actually wrote the Emancipation Proclamation was because he was being lobbied heavily by Frederick Douglass to allow freed Africans to help fight in the Civil War, to fight for their own freedom. So actually, at the time in which Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, the war was actually leaning towards the Confederates. They were better fighters than the Union anticipated. So they needed actually the assistance. And Abraham reportedly knew that if you allowed the freed slaves to fight, you can't deny them citizenship when they're literally putting their blood on the line to save the Union. So African Americans have fought on both sides of the War of Independence. Some on British side because they promised freedom from slavery. Some on American side or Patriot side because they promised the same. Promise not guilt in some areas. And then in Civil War, America was saved again with the aid of African Americans. African Americans fought in World War One against fascism, and then came home and fought fascism. So like all of that is kind of reeling through my mind with this. So it's really a couple of months after the actual winning of the Civil War, because Lincoln, he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, but it really applied to the U.S. But the Confederate States had seceded from the United States, so basically, of course, they could just say that didn't apply. But they didn't want slaves to find out about it, because a lot of slaves that did hear about the Emancipation Proclamation actually fled from their captivity and actually went north, and they joined the fight. So one of the reasons that slave owners didn't want slaves to know about the Emancipation Proclamation, not so they can just continue to profit from their labor without paying them more than food, is because they also didn't want their slaves to also become basically provide aid and comfort to the Union Army. So I understand that Opal Lee from Fort Worth, Texas, which is adjacent to Dallas, which is where I'm from, she has been lobbying for Juneteenth to become a national holiday. 47 states already recognize it. I'm really glad that it is a federal holiday now. I'm sure some states, because of the way America can be sometimes, some probably those classic red states may buck it in the future. I fear that it's going to become political, like it often does. Things like this often does. But I am glad that the history of African Americans, Native Americans, Latin Americans are kind of rising and seeping up and to join the tapestry, the historical tapestry of American history, because it's providing like literal color to the to the tapestry. It's hard to recognize non-whites as American when really, when you study the history, you don't really see them on the page. So the more that we're seeing on the page and contributing to the democracy as we know it, like the reason that an individual who's born on U.S. soil is immediately an American citizen is because of the fight to abolish slavery and the push for by African Americans and allies to provide citizenship to slaves, because they kept being born into the generations were born into this country but weren't considered citizens. So the Constitution was literally changed to remedy that, but that ended up basically creating a scenario where America became a place, a less homogenous place, where people from various backgrounds and cultures and countries and ethnicities were also would be considered Americans as well, simply because they were born here. So that was a byproduct of African Americans' fight to be seen and fully as citizens, and I feel like we still are fighting for that. It's bittersweet, because as we speak, several states are enacting laws that, in my view, seek to basically create roadblocks for voting access. And if a state can take your vote, they can take every other freedom. And they also can disregard whatever your wishes are, because you have no power to fire. And it's not just African Americans that it would affect, going after youth, because 2 out of 3 of the youth vote is leaning left now. So they're targeting anyone that's inclined to vote Democrat. African Americans voted in the 90 percentile, so some of that stuff can look or be racial in its impact, if not its intent. So that it isn't hyperbole to say this is Jim Crow 2.0. Not because it's necessarily worse, at least not yet, because even Jim Crow didn't start severe. It ramped up to the point where you can't walk down the street, or you have to step off the sidewalk when a white person comes. It didn't start on that level, so it evolved to that level. So at one point they were trying to stop voting on Sundays. Well, that definitely affects African Americans because there's a lot of sold to the poll voting campaigns that happen on Sundays. So that's a direct attack against us. So it's disingenuous to say that we're not the target. We're not the only target, but we are part of that. So that's scary. People say democracies is in the balance. That's true, but we have a hit. For us to have uh, uh, been a country that looked the other way while Jim Crow was the law of the land in southern states, was basically to allow democracy to live adjacent or be neighbors with a fascist regime. So, for African Americans, they were living under the power a fascist state, and but if you were a white man, then you could vote. You had a certain amount of agency. Of course, more so if you had money. So I think it's different now because the target isn't just minorities. So that is a greater threat to democracy as a whole because the target has expanded. So, but this is a time to be hopeful. Um, One of the reasons that African Americans, I think, um, continue to fight, continue to smile in the midst of everything, fight, even weep, is because we hold on to hope. You can't be a good fighter unless you believe on some level that you'll win eventually. And anger, revenge, it burns the person out. It doesn't fuel the fight. It basically it degrades the person who holds the hate or anger or venom in that way. Not to say none of us have that, but I don't believe that African Americans, Americans of African descent, have achieved as much as we've achieved because we used hate as a fuel. I think hope has been our fuel, faith has been our fuel, um, imagination actually has been our fuel. The ability to conceive of better has been our fuel. Family has been our fuel. So we still have that, and right now there's just this very intentional effort to suppress history, suppress the narratives, suppress efforts to take an honest look at our past. People call that blaming, but if we don't look at Germany, looked at what was honest about what happened at the Holocaust, and because of that honesty, they were able to move past it. They purposely teach their very young children, even taking them on field trips to former camps, because they made a conscious effort to make sure that they never repeat the acts of the Nazis and allow that ideology to take place. And because we don't deal with what has happened before, then it makes moving forward damn near impossible, excuse my language. So, suppression of fact is not a effective formula for healing. It is not an elixir. It is opiate. It's an opiate for people who want to see themselves as infallible. We're all fallible. We're all capable of heinous things if we believe heinous things, and so we have to expose behavior and ideology, reject both, and then so that it won't continue to repeat. Anyway, because this is kind of a little bit momentous, I wanted to say something and not just post my thoughts about it. But today I'm about to go to the store so I can make my cook my fried chicken and my greens, candy yams, and my red drink. I chose Fanta strawberry, but it has this history of hibiscus tea, which was red, which was commonly used to celebrate Juneteenth historically. So, and I felt a little bit jealous of Juneteenth because I was like, it's a Texas thing. But I'm glad it can be shared with the world. It can be shared with all of America, because it highlights a very important point, that the day that the last slave was free, that's the day that America had its full independence. And so basically, like, July 4th, in my view now, was the beginning, and Juneteenth was the end, when basically everyone was included, and at least the freedom to not be someone's possession. Citizenship, we're still striving for that, but that's how I choose to see it, as July 4th not being the period, but the first sentence. All right, happy Juneteenth, everybody.